Hello, my name is Rose Wang. I am a serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and the executive advisor at Aim High Accelerator Fund, where we bridge the gap between innovative laboratory discoveries and clinical trials with the ultimate goal of saving cancer patients' lives. I am the host of our YouTube series called Charting the Course: Interviews with Women Leaders and Mentors. Today, we welcome Dr. Barbara Weber, President and CEO of Tango Therapeutics, a biotechnology company she has built from its inception to a Series A funded startup. It is now a publicly traded clinical stage company with more than 100 employees. Barbara is also a venture partner at Third Rock Ventures since March 2015.
Tango is a biotechnology company that we founded about 5 years ago to focus on the discovery of novel targets for cancer using the genetic principle of synthetic lethality. And we've now progressed into being a clinical stage company, bringing our first molecule into the clinic in that space. The technology is quite sophisticated. It's all really based on CRISPR technology. So the discovery of CRISPR is really what made this whole platform possible to develop. Well, I certainly didn't ever start out thinking that my ultimate goal was becoming the CEO of a biotechnology company. In fact, I didn't even think that when I founded Tango. But very briefly, my background is that by training, I'm a medical oncologist. I spent about 15 years in academic medicine, seeing breast cancer patients and studying really the tumor suppressor genes, BRCA1 and 2, and their impact on the breast and ovarian cancer risk for women. In 2005, as you said, I was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and I became quite interested in how we might be able to use the fundamental genetic discoveries that had occurred over the last 10 or 15 years to do novel drug discovery and development. And I had the chance to move from academics to industry in a role at GSK, and then a few years later became the head of early development for Novartis Oncology. So my background is really a mixture of medical oncologist, cancer geneticist, and experience both in the academic setting and in big pharma doing drug discovery and development. I think, I say this often to people who ask me about my career and what they should do. Fundamentally for me, I've always been doing something that I thought was interesting and exciting and moving things forward for patients. And when I felt like I'd really accomplished what I could accomplish in that space, I was never afraid to move to something completely different. So people were quite shocked, I think, when I left academics and moved from my role at the University of Pennsylvania to GSK. But for me, it was an incredibly exciting thing to do. I thought that I knew about drug discovery and development because I'd been an investigator on some company-sponsored studies. Turns out I didn't know anything about it, right? And so I learned a tremendous amount, and I'm still learning. It's just an exciting thing to do. I think it's important, regardless of gender, right, that you do have to be somewhat unafraid to take big steps if you want to make those kind of changes. I also think that for me, there's been times where there's specific people that I've recognized as somebody that I really wanted to work with and learn from, and that's been part of driving me to make that change. And I think paying attention to that and recognizing that, at least for me, was very important. In my case, maybe I can just give you two examples. They were maybe somewhat serendipitous. The first one is David Epstein, who at the time that I moved to Novartis Oncology was the president of the Novartis Oncology business unit. He was the founding president of that unit, and I really admired what he had done. It was really through his efforts and those of the people around him that Gleevec became a drug. Many people were skeptical either that it wouldn't work or that it was way too small of a market. And I think David, the first time I met him in an interview for that job at Novartis, we were talking about, the business side of things, because he said, you know a lot about the science, but if you come here, you can also learn how we make a business out of this and how we, from that perspective. And I said, well, sort of what's your philosophy about that? And I know people think a lot about patient population size and all that, and yet you guys were really pioneers with something like Gleevec that showed that what really matters is how good the drug is and not how big the patient population. He said, you give me a drug that does something important to patients, and I will find a way to sell it. And for me, that was like, boom, right? I also watched and saw over time how he developed people and how fundamentally important to him recruiting talented people to the group were. And so for me, that's an example. Like, I didn't really know David Epstein or even who he was at the time. He was pretty famous within the pharmaceutical industry and in the world, but that was a bit lost on me until I met him. And then I thought, oh, God, this guy's astonishing, right? The second time that happened, I was at Novartis and we were working on genomic profiling and how to get that done for patients on Novartis trials. And I got introduced to the people who were just starting Foundation Medicine, which of course now is a very big player in the space of genomic profiling for cancer. And at that point, I met two important people, Mike Polini, who was the CEO, and Alexis Borisy, who was the founder from Third Rock of Foundation Medicine. And it was the same thing. I thought, this is an exceptional company, but it was founded by somebody who really had vision and just thought, this is the right thing to do, and I know how to do this. And that was, that day that I met Alexis was kind of the same thing as the day that I met David Epstein. I thought, oh man, this guy is somebody that I could learn a ton from. And the reason ultimately that I left then Novartis and chose when I left Novartis to go to Third Rock was to work with Alexis, who's still the chairman of the board of Tango, right? And David Epstein is still somebody that I talk to and work with and get advice from. So those are examples of two really important people that I came across in the process of doing what I was doing. But to me, they really stood out as exceptional people that I could learn from and wanted to work with. I think it's a difficult situation because it's kind of, in some ways, there's some truth to saying that, right? If you're a person working in the lab, I'll just use David Epstein again as an example. If you're working in the lab at Novartis and you want that president of the business unit to be your mentor, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Having a conversation with him and just getting some general advice from him once and periodically checking in could make sense. But I think selecting, if you really want a mentor, it makes sense maybe to think about it from the perspective of where do you want to be next, or where do you want to be in 2 steps, and say, okay, that I want to be that person someday. How did they get there? And let me get help from them on how that could happen. It was interesting, and I have to say I'm very grateful for both having done it last year and how we did it last year, because we're in a relatively unique situation right now with the markets, the biotech market just being absolutely horrendous, like horrible. And that we're in a situation now where we're both a public company, so we're not trying to go public, which is essentially impossible right now. And we raised a lot of money last year with that deal. So we ended up with more than $500 million in the bank at the end of our public debut. And I think that has put us now in a position where the runway for Tango, meaning we have enough cash to last us through the end of 2024. So wow. We can kind of weather this storm. The problem, which I don't think I fully understood until this happened, is when the markets get like this, the value of the companies goes way down. We've lost 60% of our value at Tango for absolutely nothing that has anything to do with Tango, right? And yet if we needed to raise money right now, we would be in big trouble, right? And many companies are in that situation. So yeah, so the actual act of doing it, the public transition, was relatively straightforward. The effect of having done it, when we did it, the way we did it, and with the people that we did it, turned out to be extremely fortuitous. Well, the timing was sort of pre-baked into the decision, right? Because I think in general, it's not uncommon, and certainly with Third Rock companies, that as you get close to your first clinical trial, that's when you can and probably should do an IPO, assuming the markets are make that an accessible issue. That was luck. Now, I would say that for us, the part of it that wasn't luck was we, in the end, didn't do an IPO. We went public with a SPAC, which is a sort of a prearranged IPO, if you will. We can do it now. It was spring, not fall. We can do it now, and we can remove any uncertainty about what's going to happen with the markets, which even by last fall, they were not very good. They weren't horrible like they are now, but they weren't very good. And you can raise a lot more money than you can with an IPO, which was correct. So, we basically, because of that particular SPAC, ended up with essentially the same investors we would have with an IPO, a lot more money and a little bit sooner, and avoided all the market turmoil as a result. Now we can sort of hunker down with our cash and get our work done. Really, for me, the biggest difference is it's like getting a report card every single day. And the report card doesn't really depend on what you're doing. It just depends on what the teacher feels like giving you that day. So, if the teacher feels like giving everybody D's every day, that's what's going to happen no matter what we do. I have to say, first of all, I have a spectacular, there is a spectacular team of people at Tango, right? I'm just a part of it. And in some ways, I'm just the public face of it. So that's super helpful. And so I think it's reasonably straightforward. Right now, there's nothing to do except just execute on what we need to do in the company and should just wait. In a weird way, COVID was somewhat helpful for that because it switched all of the investor meetings that used to require you to be traveling all over the place all the time, but I don't have to fly around all the time. So that helped for me, that helps a lot. That's a bit of a hard question to take. Well, I do have an answer for that. In terms of my actual career, I have no regrets, and I in fact feel very happy about how things have evolved. I think I have a really unique background from having the scientific and clinical background and the prominence that I had from my academic career, having the opportunity then to really learn drug discovery and development and leadership skills, and then had the opportunity to start my own company. Those are remarkable things, and I wouldn't change anything about the major decisions I made during the course of that. I would say that the things that were problematic for me during the course of my career was myself, right? Not my choices, and not the people around me. But I think if I was giving advice to myself, I would say, really pay attention to the impact you're having on other people and how they're hearing what you're saying and how they're interpreting what you're doing, not how I think what I'm saying, not how I think it is, right? I think I started to learn this at GSK and then at Novartis, where both companies put a lot of effort into leadership training and senior people, which is really all about how well you understand yourself, what kind of impact you have on other people, and how can you modulate that to get the best out of the people around you and make them want to follow you. That would be tough, I have to tell you, because that's not what I did, right? I didn't really go straight from having ideas in the lab. I'll be honest with you, I thought about synthetic lethality as a path to drug discovery 20 years ago, but I didn't know how to make that happen. I wasn't connected to the people who could make that happen, and the technology to do it wasn't available. So maybe the best advice I would give is to say, start, if you want to do that, start working with somebody who's done it and watch and learn and get connected to the people that can help you do that and evaluate whether it's possible, whether your idea is a good one to become a company or not. But I think learning, watching someone else start a company is really helpful. When I first went to Third Rock, within a few months, I became the interim chief medical officer for a new company they were just launching. And I spent 18 months, a couple days a week doing that for them, watching the interim CEO and CSO, who were well-established Third Rock partners who had done this many times before. That was an incredible thing for me to basically see firsthand, what does the first 18 months of a new company look like? How do you do that? So I always had examples of what I wanted to do before I did them, and I always had people around me who were willing to help me do it. It's very hard to do it out on your own. It is very important to me. I would say the people that probably throughout my career, have tried to mentor the people who work with me, both directly and by example. And so I think, I'm very open to anybody who wants to talk to me as often as they want at Tango. They know me, I know them. I can sort of help guide them around specific things. It's a little harder to do it with someone you're not as connected to on a regular basis.